the guys that are at the amateur and lower levels still think that way. Whereas once they get to the UFC and get to the higher levels, they actually realize that obviously it's important that I stay fit, I stay healthy, so I can keep fighting and make money. I think athlete preferences is a big driver of the way we organize our programs. So if they want to do certain exercises, I'll let them do certain exercises. You know, if there's a movement pattern that they've mastered well and they want to use that as their like key movements throughout all of their programming, then we can do that. Most golfers, even at the very highest level, have very poor physical literacy. They do not know their way around a gym. They do not know their way around basic barbell lifts. We behave in a fashion, you know, quite often that puts us at the center of our own universe, and we think that everything is our fault, right? Or if we can somehow influence the outcome of everything that's happening to us. And it's like, actually, you know, that's not the case.
All right, man, we're live. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. For those who don't know you yet, could you say who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm William Wayland. I'm a strength and conditioning consultant in the UK, in Essex, and I have a gym called Powering Through Performance in Chelmsford. And I also happen to work with the PGA European Tour, where I work with a lot of professional golfers, and I'm also pretty well known for my work with a few UFC fighters as well. So those two things sort of keep me most busy, along with running a full-time gym when it's normally open.
Yeah, when everything is good. The two fields you mentioned, golfing and MMA, seem to be pretty far apart. How did you get into those?
So the MMA came first. I'm by trade a martial artist. That's my sport. That's what I do. I'm a brown belt in Brazilian Jiujitsu. I've been doing that for 10 years. Prior to that, I did Taekwondo for 10 years and was part of a talent athlete scholarship scheme in Taekwondo. So I did that to a pretty reasonable level. And yeah, martial arts has always been my background. And then subsequently, working closely with a number of physios, some of whom are work at England Golf and the European Tour. That gave me opportunity to work on the European Tour myself. And I've now been there for a good couple of years now, working on the European Tour. So, it seems like a weird juxtaposition, but I do enjoy working with the two sports. And I say this quite a lot. If I'm working with athletes where nobody has to do any running, I'm your guy. But if they have to do any running around, I'm no help to you.
At least you know where you stand. That's always a good quality to have.
Exactly. If you want to train people to hit things hard, then I'm your guy.
Awesome. I want to start with MMA. How has your perspective on MMA physical preparation, how has that evolved over time since you started working with fighters?
Yeah, so when I first started working with fighters, probably close to 12 years ago, I made the classic mistake of wanting to give them lots of fitness work to do, lots of fancy drills to do. But a big part was a lot of the fitness, probably too excessive with that type of stuff, a lot of circuits. And the classic mistake I was making is I was trying to mimic what I was seeing. And what I've learned now after working with a number of guys at a particularly high level is that less is more, that via negativa approach. And basically now I do far less, very bare bones approach to strength and conditioning for fighters. A good example I always point out is Arnold Allen, who's currently 8th in the UFC in the featherweight division. And it's very collaborative approach we have now. And his lifting program is very, very minimal. Pretty much comes into the gym and squats, jumps, med ball work, push press, and that's pretty much it. And then the conditioning is sort of phased in and out. So we actually do more conditioning out of camp than we do in camp. So we'll do a lot of long distance work because he quite enjoys that type of thing. And then when camp's on, I actually do a lot less conditioning work with him. We'll do some high quality sprint work, and that'll be about it because he's doing so much sparring and so much high intensity drilling and training, from jiu-jitsu to stand-up drills to sparring. I don't actually have to do that much specific conditioning work. He's getting it from all the work he's doing for his sport. So in that standpoint, like far more hands off, far less involved in the conditioning elements, and I'm happy that way, for instance, with Arnold, because he's at TriStar, which is probably one of the best MMA gyms in the world. They've got a very smart approach when it comes to sparring. They keep the fighters safe. They keep them in good condition, you know, and the sparring is very qualitative. They don't grind them into the ground. You know, it's not that type of approach, you know, very old school, old fashioned MMA approach. And the same thing with the other fighters I work with. It's now far more qualitative, and the dosing is far more, acute and less sort of trying to smash them into the floor, which used to be the old school approach. And that's probably part of my martial arts background as well. It's always about more. Can you do more work? Can you do that type of thing? And I was raised in that approach as well. Part of me thinks how much better I might have been at Taekwondo if my Taekwondo coaches weren't such sadists, were insistent on just drilling us into the floor, you know, because it's the idea was it was going to make you tougher. And that attitude still exists a little bit in MMA. It's dying out, but I guess the way they're seeing it now is that a fighter, you know, obviously their body's their commodity and they've got to keep it safe. So that's probably the biggest difference.
What do you feel the proportion is of people that have this newer approach of not trying to kill the fighters in training versus the old fashioned way, the way you call it? Where do we stand? Where are we? Are we pretty far along the way where most of the people now understand that there's no point in just beating them into the ground, or is it kind of an even split?
I tell you what, it's stratified. So the guys that are at the amateur and lower levels still think that way. Whereas once they get to the UFC and get to the higher levels, they actually realize that obviously it's important that I stay fit, I stay healthy so I can keep fighting and make money. Whereas it's more at the lower levels, amateur and sort of regional level MMA fighters, they're the ones who still think that it's the ethic is in doing more and putting in a lot of grind. And then as they raise up the ranks, they start to realize actually that's not the approach. And that's where you get like a cluster of smaller, very, very high quality gyms at the top of the sport where people, that's one of the other things that's novel in MMA is that fighters will move eventually. They'll move to some of the best gyms. There's a cluster of really great gyms that people will move to. So for instance, in the UK, we don't really have, we have some good gyms, but we don't really have anywhere that's considered like a mecca to visit, you know? So for instance, even though I work with UK fighters, the two most prominent ones, like for instance, Arnold is at TriStar in Canada, and Corey McKenna is at Team Alpha Male in California. So, you know, they move to where the best sparring partners are and where the best training facilities are.
Do you feel like your earlier approach of doing maybe too much physical preparation work with your fighters, do you feel like that maybe comes with or from a place of a fear of not doing enough? Yeah,
for sure. You want to feel like you're giving the athlete the value for money almost. I'm a private coach, so at the end of the day, they're still paying me, and that's very different perhaps to a coach who works for a sports team. Because these guys are paying me for my time, I want them to feel like they were getting enough money, and that now, you know, sort of older and wiser, it's like actually that wasn't the right approach. You know, again, it was just me trying to grind them down and give them really tough conditioning drills, so it felt like they work hard, and you know, they talk to each other and say, oh, you know, then the sessions are really tough, and I feel my fitness is you know, getting really challenged. And in retrospect, that perhaps wasn't the best approach, but over time, I wised up and realized actually, if these guys want any sort of longevity, we need to take a sort of smarter approach.
How do you talk to athletes who maybe are looking for that? They're looking for a beatdown because maybe that's all they knew, that's all they know, that's what they've always done, and so that's what they're seeking. And when they come to see you, that's not what they get. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so the onus is on you to try and educate them or communicate them in some sort of narrative that fits what they're doing, and if you can make them see it from how you see it, that's important. Some guys obviously won't buy into that. They're like, no, I just want to be thrashed. And what you can do is you sort of drip feed them bits and pieces that make it feel hard. So for instance, I'll take qualitative approaches and adapt them. So for instance, I do quite a little bit of like, I'll do some hypoxic training or nasal breathing or stuff like that. So ostensibly it feels kind of hard, but I'm actually not pushing them physically too hard. So it's basically, it's not trickery, but it is of a sort, you know? So for instance, hypoxic training is a great one because it feels really, really hard, and you can keep it very qualitative. And the same thing with mouth taping, is that it feels kind of hard, and the rate limiter obviously is their respiration rate. And, it feels very, very hard, but you know that the outputs are actually going to be kind of modest. It's not going to be that hard. So you can mess around a little bit and convince them otherwise. But eventually, usually, particularly, if they're paying you and you convince them, well, look, at the end of the day, appeal to authority usually works pretty well with martial artists, because it's their entire training career. They've always had an authority kind of telling them to do this, to do that, because that's the way martial arts work, right? The instructor, the professor, whatever, it's kind of do this and trust in the process. And fighters are pretty good for that, actually, because they come from a very hierarchical sport,
From your perspective, what is the most overlooked aspect of physical preparation for mixed martial arts athletes?
The most overlooked?
Yeah.
I'd say probably is treating recovery like you treat training is probably the biggest thing. And because these guys now, especially the guys who are this next generation, who do everything really, really well, whereas in the past we had guys who were like stylists coming from different martial arts and then coming to MMA. Whereas now these guys are good at everything. They're doing everything. So the one thing they're usually bad at is getting good at trying to do nothing. I know that sounds kind of odd, but it's so. For instance, I teach them breath work. I teach them the benefit of using a little bit of compression. So we use the Normatec or the compression trousers. We teach them to use the sauna in a way that it's not a torture tool, because a lot of them associate the sauna with being a place to cut weight. So a lot of them, I don't want to use the sauna. I don't want to go near there, because they associate it with the weight cut. But we teach them, actually, this is how you use sauna, for recovery and wellness. And these are all the benefits. So we teach them that. We try and, help them with their sleep quality. Basically just try and get them treating recovery just as important as everything else is. And that's probably the biggest thing a lot of guys overlook at the moment,
Would you mind sharing your approach to the sauna when it comes to recovery and what you recommend to your guys?
Yeah, sure. So we keep it very simple. It depends on how experienced you are with using the sauna. So if you're a complete novice, we usually suggest short, sort of maybe 1 to 2 10-minute spells in the sauna, at a pretty high heat. In the UK, we have a problem in that people don't like hot saunas. Our saunas, the publicly available ones, aren't very hot. If you can find a hot one, that's great. But a lot of them are what most, if you were from Finland or Norway, you go, this isn't a hot sauna, this is no good. So find a decent sauna first, and then obviously short spells. And then what we do is we build them up, to sort of 20-minute, 15-minute spells in the sauna 2 to 3 times. Cold shower, full recovery between each sauna visit. And then the other thing I'll emphasize is try some breathing in the sauna. I'm quite fond of Wim Hof on fire. So it's basically a Wim Hof breathing technique, but used in the sauna. And we'll do things like that, mainly to help them focus, because that desire to leave really becomes very strong. And if you get them doing breathing drills and stuff, they find it easier to stay in the sauna and not want to leave, because you want that buildup of endorphins, and you want that response to build, the desire to leave, but you've got to just resist that for a little while. So that's how we gradually integrate sauna for the guys. But yeah, usually 2 to 3 rounds, starting at 10 minutes, and then we build up to 15, sometimes longer. Some of them get addicted to it. They actually like doing it, and we have to actually scale it back a bit, because if you're saunaing too much, it can actually affect subsequent performance. So we try and make sure they don't go too crazy.
You mentioned one of your athletes liking doing on-feet conditioning in the off season or away from camp.
Yeah.
Do you usually go for on-foot stuff, or do you go to off-feet for your MMA athletes?
Yeah, it depends. It's really individualistic. So that one particular athlete, Arnold, he's exceptional, because he did a triathlon for fun. He didn't prepare for it. He just did one. So he really, really enjoys the long distance, mainly because it's a mental challenge and almost meditative, I think, for him. So he just enjoys the challenge of doing it. Like he went for a 10K run once and ran a marathon. So that's the type of guy he is. So it's if he wants to do that, he can do that. But normally I like them to sort of keep doing their martial arts training sort of even at a moderate level, even when they're not in camp. Mm-hmm. So there's always that background level of sort of general conditioning coming from the sports practice, because if you've ever done jiu-jitsu or MMA, even the sparring, even sort of quite moderate sparring, still quite hard, mm-hmm. you know, and you take knocks and bangs and what we call micro trauma, fingers, you know, feet, shoulder, elbows, things like that start to hurt a little bit. You maybe don't tap soon enough, and you end up with like a lot of sort of minor sort of soft tissue issues start building up. So mm-hmm. we're careful with the amount of on-feet conditioning we then start adding, because that's more stress potentially on top of anything else. But I do it basically on a personal preference. Some guys really like doing it, some guys hate it, and if they really hate it, I'm not going to force them to do it, you know. And we keep the conditioning very, very, you know, nothing too hard, you know, sort of 140 to 160 beats per minute, mm-hmm. steady state, nothing crazy, you know, mouth taped if they want to go mouth taped. So, you know, it's kind of down to the individual what we do.
Yeah, I want to come back on something you mentioned before, and just now the aspect of the collaboration with the athlete when it comes to the program. How far will you go in that exchange? As in, how much ownership do you give to the athlete themselves on the layout and then the content of the program?
So basically, it's a case of they have to earn the ownership pretty much. And you respect the fact that every athlete is on their own sort of narrative adventure, and you've got to groove with that where you can, and respect their autonomy and their desire to do things. Obviously, they're hiring you to give your input and give influence. So fundamentally, if they're very new and their training age is very low, then you're going to take more of a hand on the wheel. Once they grow with you and you develop a relationship together, then you can start letting off and letting them make more decisions for themselves. And it's basically a relationship between, you know, when they first start working with you, everything's going to be very ordered. And basically they're coming to you because they don't know what to do, or everything's a little bit overwhelming. They want more advice, they want input, they want structure. So you provide them that structure. Once they get used to doing things in a very structured fashion, over time, gradually you start giving them more decision-making power, more autonomy. And it does depend on the individual, because some want that autonomy to explore and do a little bit of their own thing. And then some of the athletes, they like the authority. They like being dictated to when and where, and they won't ask why. They'll just do it. And then you've got to take control and do what you think is best for them. Other more inquisitive athletes will challenge you. They'll question why. They'll you know, they'll make it you know, sometimes challenging, because they'll either kick back, maybe they don't want to do what you're asking them to do. You know, but it varies from individual to individual. But definitely there's a relationship between training age and the amount of autonomy you give them. For instance, I've been working with Arnold, because he's an easy example, for like nearly 9 years now. And when I first started working with him, it was very much do this, do this, do this. Now it's like, what do you feel like doing today? Hey, here's the program. You know, you let me know if there's anything you don't want to do. You know, and he's in a difficult situation too at the moment. Canada's got pretty harsh lockdown, so he's had to adapt an awful lot. And it's been a lot of that over the past year. For instance, with a lot of the athletes I've been working with, a lot of them have found it hard because they're having to adapt so often, so rapidly, that they need to learn how to be more autonomous. And that's something I've been trying to emphasize, is that, look, we're working hard trying to make you very competent. What we don't want is you to become codependent on me, keep telling you what to do all the time, because you know, if you're working from your home gym, maybe there are certain things you can't do. You don't need to keep phoning me up and asking, what should I do? What should I do? You know, you've got to be able to make the decision on your own.
Is that kind of letting go of the full control of the program itself and the content of the sessions? Is that something that came over time for you as well? Just like the trying not to do too much just for the sake of, you know, getting them or giving them what they think they need? Yeah,
it's a case of giving them enough responsibility that it doesn't overwhelm them. You know, so for instance, I think athlete preferences is a big driver of the way we organize our programs. So you know, if they want to do certain exercises, I'll let them do certain exercises. You know, if there's a movement pattern that they've mastered well and they want to use that as their like key movement throughout all of their programming, then we can do that. but that might be a technical constraint, that might be an equipment constraint, but we'll let them lead with that, But then on the other times, I have to take a firm hand, and they've basically got a movement that's perhaps a crutch that they're leaning on too much, and there's not enough variability in their program. I'll lean in and go, look, you need to do more of this or that, whatever it may be. If an athlete's very married to like bilateral movements, for instance, or very married to a trap bar, for instance, they like that piece of equipment because it makes them feel strong, and it allows them to lift a lot of weight, but there's like, well, look, we need more variability in your program. We need to do more unilateral work. We need to do more peaking work. We need to do whatever, and it's an interplay. It's a lot of back and forth between you and the athlete. And it's sort of being comfortable as a coach as well, to be able to let the athlete choose, provided they're competent enough to choose. And, that takes time to build.
Mm-hmm. How strong is strong enough for MMA?
So the UFC PI put together a number of, it's a great PDF book. It's free to download, and they've got like their isometric mid-thigh pull and a number of other strength standards. So you can see what they rank as good and bad among each weight class. Mm-hmm. So you use that as a frame of reference, and then decide how your fighters match up to that. Are their tests the gold standard? It's pretty close. But if you've got your own testing that you think is more valid, then you can use that as a marker. Mm. But we do know that fighters, for instance, they do benefit from enhanced strength levels. They do benefit from particularly enhanced lower body strength for striking power. We know there's strong relationships between those things. Mm. So, because we use objective measures like the mid-thigh pull, that takes out all the iffiness of being good at squatting or deadlifting or whatever. They can just,
levers and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. It takes that all away, so it gives you a nice objective measure. So you can then point them towards standards of like, look, this is how strong we think you should be. This is where we kind of want you. But then you measure that against their performance in the cage. The feedback from the athlete as well. Do you feel strong is a massive thing for fighters, for instance. Whereas for golfers, I can almost guarantee you most of them aren't anywhere near strong enough. So, but with the fighters, they feel it as soon as they come in contact with their opposition, and they'll come and say to you after a fight, if they felt that they were overpowered, it's like, look, this guy is so much stronger than me. I feel I need to work on this and that. And you listen to that feedback and then put that into your program as well, along with your objective measures. So in answer to your question, I'm not going to give you a specific answer because that differs from athlete to athlete.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it's important to have that objective measure that you can then compare your athletes to. And the UFC PI and Duncan French have done a great job of laying out what they think is a sound strength standards for fighters.
So you mentioned, when a fighter comes out of the fight and talks to you and tells you what his feeling was, what are you able to draw from those feelings when it comes to, I guess, the strength and the power side? How do you then go and modify the program to get those changes? Because it's a very, very technical sport. I'm sure you agree with me. And so this is a huge determining factor in the outcome of the fight itself. So then how do you balance out that aspect of you won or you lost with, was I strong enough or not? Was I powerful enough or not? Yeah. To what extent does it, and it's obviously not to diminish the work that you and other strength and conditioning coaches do, but how much impact does it have at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's one of those questions that's difficult to answer because fundamentally you've got to take the whole picture in of someone can lose and then blame, I wasn't strong enough, when actually maybe they weren't technically good enough. Maybe their skill level wasn't there because, as a Jiu-Jitsu Brown Belt, for instance, you'll grapple with guys who are perhaps not as technically good as you. I'm not a weak person. My training videos are on if you want to go see them. I like lifting and they're, what strength coach doesn't like strength training? But a throwaway comment is quite often, oh, you felt so strong. And it's like, I didn't get a brown belt for being strong. Mm-hmm. There's technique there too, efficiency and all this type of stuff. But to them, it feels like I'm so much stronger than they are. And it's like, no, it's the fact that I technically, you're ahead of that person, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it can vary, especially if a fighter could well be, lucky. They could be, maybe not particularly strong or powerful, but technically better than their opponent, and they come away with a win. So they make the assumption, I don't need to get any stronger. I don't need to get any more powerful because they've won, right? But so actually there's weakness there that maybe we need to work on. You watch the tape and you go, look, you got taken down here. You got bullied against the cage here. They were able to move you around. They were able to hit the takedown. Things like that. That all matters when you feed back into how the fighter felt or the way they say they felt. However, if they lose, there could be a pride thing. It's like, look, I thought I was technically better than the guy, and they were stronger than me. So that means that I need to go do more strength training. It's like, well, maybe you don't. Maybe you actually need to work on your sparring, your handwork, whatever. So yeah, you kind of take the really holistic approach and try and feed it back into them, because as long as you've still got objective information on your side, where you can turn around and go, yes, our testing suggests that you do need to get stronger, or no, our testing suggests that maybe strength isn't the issue. So you marry those two things together, and that's where you come up with both the sort of subjective and objective, and tie them together with an approach that you work on with the fighter. And that's the key to that type of thing, is dealing with that situation, provided you're doing some sort of objective testing somewhere.
How closely do you work with the sports coaches of your different MMA athletes?
So that varies. If they're more local to me, that works a little bit better. However, for instance, if they're in Canada or if they're in California, I'm not speaking to their sports coach much at all. The athlete almost has to act as a go-between a little bit, which isn't great. It's not ideal. So it does vary based on the situation, but quite often they'll ask to look at the programs and make sure that it slots into everything they've got planned. But that's where taking a very minimal approach is also useful, because it means that you're not interfering with whatever the coach has planned as well. And you got to remember, usually, yes, while they have a head MMA coach, they usually got like 3-4 coaches as well. So they'll have their striking coach, their grappling coach, their Muay Thai coach, and they'll all have different plans as well. So that's where MMA is changing, is that basically being more unified, because in the past, we've had situations where the different coaches don't talk to each other, and one will have one thing planned, one will have another thing planned. And quite often there'll be a clash of physical qualities, and athletes will be very, very tired as a result. And that's still a problem for more of the sort of low-level amateur guys, where the athletes are quite often see different coaches on their own without any sort of oversight or guidance. And the only one who's sort of controlling that whole process is the athlete themselves, and they're not sometimes in the best position to make that decision.
Did you ever run into, obviously without pointing fingers or naming names, but did you ever run into any issues with fighting coaches that maybe thought that they knew better when it came to the strength and conditioning aspects of the program?
Yeah, I still do. So it's still common now, and it's generally the more old school the coaches, or a lot of it's definitely a generational thing. So coaches more my age, I'm nearly 38 now, and I've been doing martial arts for 20 years. Whereas there are coaches still coaching that are sort of in their 50s and 60s, who completely different approach to the way they were taught, and the way their relationship with strength and conditioning, and a lot of the old school myths of like, oh, it'll make you slow, it'll make you bulky, you'll be muscle bound, all this type of stuff that still persists. People think, oh, that's a something from the past, but it's like there are some guys that still believe that, and I've learned that more so, particularly in golf, where loads of people, especially the pundits, still believe that type of stuff. So yeah, you'll run into coaches now and again that still have very old-fashioned approaches, but then some coaches, the good ones are willing to put their ego aside, just like any good coach should, and say, look, this is my area of understanding. I trust that you're an expert. This is your area of understanding. How can we work together? Whereas other coaches, as soon as their authority or their knowledge is challenged, obviously they retreat back into themselves, and they're not willing to communicate or work with you, and that still happens from time to time.
As the sport grows, it's been growing a lot the last few years. As it keeps on growing, what do you feel are some of the untapped aspects of the preparation, whether it's on the sports side or on the strength and conditioning side, for MMA athletes?
Yeah, so I think again, the biggest change that will be coming will be more holistic approach in that there's more unified oversight with what fighters are doing,
Mm-hmm.
less disparate elements trying to all feed into the one athlete, and yeah, the athlete also taking more ownership of the approach that they take.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still sort of those two things coming together. They're going to make a big difference. And the gradual intrusion of more technology as well. It's going to get more. There'll be more technology used. It's always been difficult with combat athletes to use technology with them, but as things are getting miniaturized and we're getting better at it, we're able to monitor more of what's happening of the fighters. In the past, a lot of wearables have been bulky. Fighters haven't been able to wear them while they've been sparring and stuff, but now we're getting better at that, so we can measure, heart rate and other stuff, lactate, whatever. When fighters are fighting and things, and doing their sparring between rounds, that's changing as well now. So that's getting better too. So there'll be more sports and more medical oversight as well, which is a big element that a lot of fighters haven't had before. Definitely a bigger need for more sports medicine, because these guys, quite often even in sparring or training, will pick up breaks and injuries, won't acknowledge them, and that's where, either better understanding of sports medicine or having more people like that as part of their preparation team can help them an awful lot. Because, I know guys who've picked up serious injuries in training camp, they basically try and carry on, and that's where you get the pullout a week before, or sometimes even on the fight, on the way in, the doctor will look at them and go, this is wrong or this is wrong, you can't fight. And it's a complete shock to the fighter. They maybe knew in the back of their mind that something wasn't right, but I've had guys, before, where it's like, well, actually you fractured this in your hand. It's like, oh, I didn't know, it was a bit sore, but I didn't realize I was walking around with a broken hand. And it was like, yeah, you can't fight. And they're like, oh my God, no, it's awful. But things like that sometimes do happen. Concussion as well is always another potential issue that they're getting better at making sure fighters spar very smartly. They look after themselves if they think they're concussed. Whereas a lot of the old school approach would be just carry on, don't worry about it. Whereas now, fighters, I've got a headache, I can't get to sleep, social distress, my mood's changing, all this type of stuff. Now we can take a good look at that and take better care of the fighters as well, because that's something that's now starting to be better understood. And I've had guys where they're like, I can't sleep, or after a fight, that's, I've had vision issues or headaches or whatever. And it's like, look, I think you're concussed. I think you need to go see a doctor. And, we're getting better at looking after fighters and taking care of that type of stuff now.
On the tech side, what do you feel is going to be the biggest leap forward in terms of when these different, let's say, tools will be available for fighters in a fighting environment? What might be a big step forward when it comes to monitoring what's going on with them?
Yeah, I think the wearables are making a big impact. A lot of them now are using, and then the HRV, stuff like that. A lot of them are using things like Whoop and stuff like that. Again, the metrics can be a little bit wonky sometimes. They're not perhaps the best, but it means that fighters are becoming more interested in taking control of their wellness and their recovery. And it comes back to that, I said, taking ownership of recovery. And if there are tools that can help them with that stuff, then that's all the better. I just hope that the technology is reliable, it's trustworthy, because as we've been seeing recently, some of it is perhaps not as reliable or as good as some of the marketing tells us that it is. So that's making a difference as well. And then other stuff, perhaps slightly more invasive stuff, is getting easier to do. Like, I know more guys are doing like lactate testing, stuff like that, cage side. So that's good. So they can test lactate between sparring rounds, things like that. Can be very useful. So there's lots of different things that are starting to creep in. More physiological testing, basically, and more physiological testing in the cage environment. We've had this type of stuff, in athletics and other sports for a long time, but fighting, it's never really been a thing, because either the technology can't be worn while they're sparring, or nobody has the expertise. And now that there's more and more of that available.
Today's episode is sponsored by Strength Coach Network, the #1 education and networking platform for strength and conditioning coaches. Strength Coach Network offers over 200 hours of video education delivered by elite level presenters such as Dan Pfaff, Jada Mayo, Derek Hansen, Carl Dietz, and Buddy Morris. If you work with or want to work with team sport athletes and take your coaching to the next level, you will find everything you need to know on topics such as speed development, plyometric training, conditioning, rehab, program design, and much, much more. Strength Coach Network also allows you to interact with hundreds of coaches from all over the world, ranging from top NFL, NBA, and MLB coaches all the way to the grassroots level. You can ask questions, respond to popular threads, and get valuable insight from the best in the business. Strength Coach Network also covers career and business development tailored specifically for coaches. If you want a resume critique, need to get ready for an interview, or are looking for professional networking advice, go to strengthcoachnetwork.com/upside to get your first month at half price. That's strengthcoachnetwork.com/upside. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about golf now. Let's take almost a 180 turn and go with golfing. So remind me how you got into the golfing circuit, and then what your role is there these days.
Yeah, sure. So I started working closely with a physio, and now he's strength and conditioning lead on the European tour, a fellow called Dan Coughlin, who's a good friend of mine. He happens to lecture at UCL in London as well. And he basically started sending me golf clients because he saw my work with MMA and was impressed. And thanks to that, he then started sending more golfers. Starting out sort of regional level, sort of decent level golfers, and I guess I was doing a good job because I then started getting more. And then I never really that involved with physio networks, but I understand now that physios do act like a big network, and they often refer to one another, and then will refer to other experts. Normally it's to go up the chain. Normally it will be to see specialists or to see orthopedic surgeons. And what more physios are realizing now, actually, we need to be able to refer down the chain towards either personal trainers or towards strength and conditioning experts who can help with post injury, strength and conditioning development. And I was in a good position where, I guess I was doing a pretty good job. So I kept getting more clients. This is how, things operate in the private world, is that your reputation is obviously worth an awful lot. And, and then eventually I spoke at England Golf Conference, and it sort of snowballed. And then I got asked to work on the European Challenge Tour, which is the feeder tour for the European Tour. And now I work between the Challenge Tour and the European Tour. Normally, I should be out at Abu Dhabi, Dubai this week, but here I am in the UK. But, I'm normally out once every couple of weeks. I'll be, could anywhere around Europe or the Middle East. And basically we work on a basis with the athletes where it's first come, first serve. We can have up to 150 players at a tournament, so any of them can come see us, but it's all done on a first come, first serve basis. There are some guys we see very regularly, some guys we don't see, and some guys that have their private trainers or whatever. And the service is free to the athletes, and it's not just strength and conditioning. The European Tour Performance Institute it's medical, it's physio, it's psychology, it's nutrition, skin doctors. They basically try and give the athletes as much as possible, which is one of the big differences I think between the European Tour and the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour, they prize money's better, but they don't really look after the players the same way the European Tour does. And I think that's one of the big differences between the two tours. Because occasionally we get PGA players come over and they're surprised that all this expert experience is available to them and all these services available to them, and they're like, do I have to pay for it? And so no, it's free to the players. You're playing on the European Tour, you get access to this stuff. So
that's really good. That's really good. The fact that they get to come in and just work with you is pretty exceptional, really. Yeah,
it's always really nice, especially when you have players who genuinely want to improve their performance and they want to make full use of the service and they really do. Whereas other guys, they're a bit wary. They maybe just want to dip their toe or just see the physios, and it does vary. And the fact that we can also offer the service on the developmental tour as well, on the challenge tour, is really good as well, because what that means is we can help the players develop on the challenge tour, and develop a good work ethic, develop a good strength and conditioning strategy. And then when they come to the European tour, they're doing everything exactly right, or as close to right as we hope, Whereas some of the more old school players that are still on the European tour, who've been there a long time, still a little bit old fashioned. They're not so sure about strength and conditioning. They're still worried about how it might affect their swing, things like that. So yeah, and we try and get through to those guys too, but it helps that the fact that we can work on the challenge tour and these guys come up and they kind of know what they're doing at that point.
So for those who still believe that improving your overall physical condition is going to have a negative impact on your golfing skills and performance, how do you bring it to people that are still skeptical?
So golfers love numbers. So this is the thing. Like they're a very numbers oriented sport, with the biggest predicates of performance being clubhead speed and ball speed. And what we've seen is that the players that have higher clubhead speed, higher ball speed, obviously hit the ball further. And we've got tons of evidence now that shows that basically if you hit the ball further, you're more likely to win more prize money. And the difference is actually pretty big. If you're hitting it over 300 yards, you're probably going to win a lot more prize money than people hitting it, say, just 280 yards. So that's a big motivator, obviously. Look, you can win more money. That's a really easy way to sell it to people, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good way to do it too. The other way is, obviously, you've been more injury free, because that's obviously one of the other things of risk of injury in golf. I think it's nearly 80% of injuries in golf are overuse, and we can reduce overuse injury by something around the area of about 50% just through the addition of resistance training, sensible resistance training. So you can get a big reduction in overuse injuries. So the argument is, well, if you're less hurt, you can play more, you can win more money. It comes back to the money argument,
Yeah.
So, and these guys want to feel healthy as well. And this is the one thing perhaps I didn't appreciate when I started, because you work in a very tough sport like combat sports. You think they're the toughest athletes going. Once you actually dig down into the golf swing and the mechanics of it, it's actually a very violent movement, and it's why physios make so much money helping dudes who are like over 50. Fix their bad back from having played golf. And it's like, I don't play golf much myself, but the few times I do, after one round, the next day I'm in bits. My everything hurts, and it's like, because the golf swing is, I think on contact, I think the force through the spine, something like 7,000 newtons, made possibly higher for the highest level professionals. So
wow.
I think people have likened it. I think a linebacker, when they tackle someone, it's something in the order of like 5,000 to 6,000 newtons of compression to the spine. I think, this is why, hand in hand with the golf, with golf as a culture is, it's golf and back pain. They're almost synonymous with each other, right? So the one big argument we make is, well, you want to play more golf, you want to be less hurt, you need to be more robust. And this is where, I guess, trying to teach and transform golf as a culture. Because, if you want a good laugh, you Google golf fitness and take a look at some of the stuff people are doing, and it just has you, head in hand. It's like, what's going on? What is this stuff? And you still see it now. And I think it's because for a long time, golf was always about like special strength first, and whatever you do, it has to help to improve the golf swing. And I think they put the cart of specificity before the horse, so to speak. So what we're trying to do now is get them to think about, well, actually having good foundational strength levels helps you to then, acquire more special strength going forwards, and that will lead to the hitting it further and so on. And trying to put the wacky core drills and stuff aside, or the instability training aside for a second, and focus on fundamental strength and conditioning.
At what point do you get, do you get into any specific strength and conditioning work with the golfers?
Yeah, so I use a few special strength drills, and this is where, for instance, having someone who can analyze GRF data or ground reaction force data in the golf swing, so you can figure out where the athlete's putting their pressure into the ground. Because obviously having good low body strength is a really great foundation for that. But then once you can figure out, well, if there's weak links in the way they use the floor, so if they, early extension, or they're not pushing enough through their lead leg, things like this, you can then start to design special strength drills that kind of allow them to do that. So I'll toy around with things like med ball work and speed stick work to try and get them using the floor how their coach wants them using the floor. Things like that are really, really useful. And then sort of the sharp end of what I do is, the speed stick work. If you look across my social media, stuff like that, you'll see me putting together special sort of speed stick drills where we'll focus on overspeed and focusing on the golf swing, like the raw physical elements of the golf swing, how they use the ground, how much separation they create, and how they push into the ground, without having to hit the ball. And then eventually we then try and get them to obviously practice their golf swing with maximum intent as well. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I try and argue for, is that, when players say, oh, I want to swing faster, and then my answer to them is, well, swing faster, because most of them are taught to swing with such sort of a smooth technical approach. You watch guys like Bryson DeChambeau, when he hits a drive, he looks like he's psyching himself up for a 1-rep max. And it's that same type of intent, is that you've got to go for it. And that's the change in thinking, is that it's perhaps this whole culture that comes with golf of sort of it being sedate, very technical, very, very beautiful, more intent, a little bit more aggression when it comes to your approach. And it's that approach as well. Perhaps that was what comes from martial arts, maybe, is bringing that to the way they approach, hitting the golf ball.
And from your experience, having, gotten a lot of people through the basics of strength and conditioning and beyond within golf, do you find that they maybe have that fifth gear when they hit the ball, once they've learned how to do it with their whole body, say on a squat, it could be a split squat or anything else, that they develop that ability to actually push themselves a little bit farther in their work?
For sure. So it definitely helps them with the intent, and it also helps them because they feel strong, because it's a mindset as well. Then when it comes to hitting the ball, they know that they can really go for it and it's not going to tear them apart. Whereas a lot of guys back away from it because they're worried, if I really go for it, I might pull something or I might hurt myself, and by making them feel physically strong and robust, they walk in and they know that they can smash it and walk away, without any issue. And I think that's the other thing, is teaching them that they're not fragile. Because a lot of them a particular mindset in golf is the idea that they're kind of these hyper specialized, somewhat fragile ball hitting machines. And it's like, well, actually, to handle all that ball striking and the stress of the golf swing, you need to be robust. You need to have a well-rounded physicality in order to be able to handle that. Again, like I said, the biggest injury occurrence is usually overuse injury, and that comes from just too much golf. The body isn't able to handle the sheer volume of work they're doing. So that's why general preparatory approaches, at least for now, seem to work for golf so well.
Do you take is there anything to be mindful of when you put someone through strength, like you said, a general physical preparation program? Will you emphasize more single leg stuff, or is there no specific considerations to have for the golfer himself?
Yeah, so generally, obviously, because golf is a bilateral sport, and the golf swings from a low body perspective is actually quite low velocity. The low body mechanics occur in actually a pretty small time frame. Obviously, the golf club itself is traveling very fast, but if you look at what the low body is doing in the golf swing, it's actually moving quite slow. So they've got lots of time to generate lots of force, which is why heavy bilateral lifts seem to transfer so well. So, I've got more and more golfers now doing like heavy quarter squats, heavy trap bar work, that type of stuff. And that really helps with their relationship with the floor and how they drive into the ground. With some of the guys, there's a preference for single leg work. So this is where this individuation comes in. Some of them like doing the single leg stuff. Some of them like doing the bilateral stuff. And it's, again, a little bit of personal preference. But here's the big thing, is most golfers, even at the very highest level, have very poor physical literacy. They do not know their way around a gym. They do not know their way around basic barbell lifts. So for a lot of the time, for some of them, it's teaching them how to do the very basics very well. And we'll have them do the basics for, months on end before we do anything, specific. And the other thing I think I did a post not that long ago, is one of the big things is teaching golfers how to jump, because most of them, we know that for instance, high force production in mid-thigh pull is a really good predicate of how hard they'll hit it. The other big predicate is their counter movement jump force. So, but a lot of golfers, because all their practice is so specific, most of them have lost the ability to jump. They don't know how to do it anymore. They probably haven't jumped since they did physical education in school. So you get them to jump, and their interpretation of a jump can sometimes be a little bit comical. So you then take the time, you teach them how to jump again. Triple extension, the basics of jumping. Some of them I even have to teach them hand-supported jumping. So, hold onto a surface and use a little bit of an assist to just kind of bounce, and low-level bouncing, stuff like that. Just teaching them how to, address the ground in a ballistic fashion again, because a lot of them have forgotten how to do it. They maybe haven't done it for 10 years, 15 years. And then once you teach them that, obviously then they learn to put force into the ground very, very quickly. And, one of our tests that we use with the performance unit is jump testing. So, but if they don't know how to jump, there's no point jump testing them, right? It's kind of, again, a lot of it's a fragility mindset. The fact that the jumping's quite, it's quite tough on the body if you haven't done it for a long time. So teaching them the very, very basics of jumping, and we have a progression that we use for reintegrating jumping.
Yeah, that's really great to see that you're really bringing this whole approach. Is not just the strength. There is all the other components that are beneficial to the athletes, and so that's what you drive forward. I like that. I want to talk about a third topic that I know is that I know you appreciate is philosophy in strength and conditioning. So where does this marriage come from for you, and why is it important in your opinion?
Yeah. I tell you what, it's more of a personal interest, and for a long time, I always kept it separate from my strength and conditioning, because you always think people will go, oh, that's a load of nonsense, or that's no help, and or who do you think you are? You're not a philosopher or anything. It's like, well, and then I came into the contact with the work of a guy called Vizzy Andre, and he dabbles in philosophy. I think he's a law student, and his book, Practical Reflections and Maxims, The Economy of Truth, that's the name of his book, is well worth a look. And I've been involved in his course and doing some of his stuff. And he basically said, if you want to do something that's different to every other strength and conditioning coach, how about you take some of your personal interest in philosophy and try and tell us how it's helped you as a coach? And I'm like, well, I don't know if people will respond well to that. He goes, well, you can only try and see what happens. And now I've started doing that. Loads of people are suddenly really, accepting of it, and they're really interested in it. And I get a lot of questions about it. So I guess the big thing was injecting more stoicism into my approach as a coach. And Stoic philosophy really helped me out, particularly a few years ago. I had a spell where I was diagnosed with depression. Sorry, I've got an incoming call. Am I still connected?
You're back.
Yeah. Okay. This is the problem with doing it on your phone. So yeah, I know. And so it was a few years ago. I was diagnosed with depression, and one of the things that was recommended to me was cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a pretty common prescription here in the UK. You're offered antidepressants or cognitive behavioral therapy, or a mixture of the two. And basically, like being an inquisitive person, I was like, well, what is this cognitive behavioral therapy? What's it based on? What's the thinking behind it? And I basically read that a lot of the background of cognitive behavioral therapy is based on Stoicism. So I went down that path and then learned gradually more and more and more. And the biggest fundamental takeaway from me with Stoicism is basically, and this is something that's exists in religion and a few other things, is basically the idea that you focus on what you can control and don't worry about the things you cannot control. Because we behave in a fashion, quite often that puts us at the center of our own universe, and we think that everything is our fault, right? Or if we can somehow influence the outcome of everything that's happening to us. And it's like, actually, that's not the case. Some other people are going to be sometimes horrible. Other people are going to, make you stressed. Sometimes stuff is your fault. What can you take ownership of? And also what's not worth worrying about. And from there, I sort of started reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, Seneca, Cicero and a few other different, ancient philosophers who'd written about this. Guys like Ryan Holiday, Massimo Pugliese, modern writers who'd written about it too. Ryan Holiday, for instance, he's very famous for putting together, modern materials on Stoicism that a lot of people really like. And recently it's really caught on. And I know a few people have been, poking fun and saying, this sudden popularity of Stoicism. I always say that I was interested in it before it was cool. But, it's suddenly become quite trendy. And it's good that it's helping so many people out, particularly now we're living in such a stressful time, and people are trying to, focus on themselves and what it is that they can do, and then not worry about the things, obviously, that they can't control. Because one thing that this whole situation we're in now has shown us that there's, often a lot of stuff that we have no control over, and we just got to try and adapt as best we can, and just no pun intended, but keep powering through, and
nice one.
And that's where it's kind of blended the two things. And the other thing I've started doing now is integrating basic philosophical concepts into strength and conditioning. So talking about archetypes and things like this. I recently did a post talking about romanticism and rationalists, and how some strength coaches are very romantic and the way they approach strength and conditioning. These are some of perhaps the more old school guys, and then you get guys who are perhaps more rational. These are the guys who perhaps are, very formal sports science education, often work in roles as sports scientists. So they approach everything from that sort of, but like we've spoken about today, you want that mixture of objective information, but also subjective soft skills, and then learning to put those two things together, what help us be better coaches. And it's just marrying that interest in philosophy. Like I've done a few posts talking about, the Stoic reflections that have helped me, ideas that have helped me be a better coach, and just keep exploring that stuff and sharing it with people, because it seems to be quite popular.
And it seems to make a lot of sense in the realm of sports, because there is always that element that you will not be able to control the opponent. Where obviously depends on the sport, but there is that aspect of it, and so it is quite applicable to just think about what can I control, what can I do, what can I not do, and then don't lose sleep on that, and then do the former, and just whatever happens pretty much.
Yeah, and then the other thing is the idea of sort of Stoic virtue, and trying to be true to yourself and to your nature, and not let sort of people steer you in directions that mean that you're not being kind of true to yourself, and going with your best judgment and acting in a fashion that at the end of the day, do you feel at ease with yourself, or are you angry because maybe you lied, maybe you felt like perhaps you didn't give someone the best service possible, maybe, and it's just trying to make sure that you're trying to live up to your own standards,
Yeah, it's interesting, because what came to mind is a quote from Gary Vaynerchuk, who's in the digital marketing space. It has nothing to do with Stoicism per se, but I feel like a lot of his concepts do integrate those broader ideas. But one of his quotes is, doing the right thing is always the right thing to do. And I feel like Stoicism embodies that quite a bit. And it's, it's to say it, kind of crudely, is like, be a fucking good person. And be nice to your athletes, to the people around you, do the right thing. And at the end of the day, we'll all get out ahead if everybody acts like this, right?
Yeah. And the other thing that it helped me with, like, just trying to be more authentic, because when I started on social media, you see what other people are doing, and initially you sort of start mimicking them. But so actually, I need to put more of myself into this, because at the end of the day, people, there's so many strength and conditioning coaches and experts now, and it's like, well, do they want more of the same, or do they want authentic coaching experience, try and get the best out of themselves? And I think that's the thing, because there's so many experts now, and people are so good at conveying information. Perhaps what we're lacking is sort of authenticity and a little bit of wisdom, how to navigate all that stuff. And I think that's where the industry is kind of shifting now, is that more coaches looking towards being more authentic versions of themselves, rather than just regurgitating the same infographics over and over again.
Yeah, and it's also going to give a unique perspective to whatever message they're putting through, if it's really given through their own personal filter, with obviously their own biases, but that's what makes it unique, without being afraid of being you, and not trying to just be a copycat of all the other people that said the same thing before you, right?
Exactly. And I think it's because so many people are afraid of being judged negatively.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll always say stuff that either gets a lot of attention or gets a lot of people's backs up. Those seem to be the two strategies people take. So they either take stuff where everybody's going to, you're going to get a lot of likes because it's something kind of maybe a trite message like, I don't know, I can't think of any good examples, but something that people are all obviously going to agree with. It's a kind of obvious statement. And then the other stuff is saying something very, very contrary, like, simple things are like, back squats are bad or you shouldn't Olympic lift or whatever. And you're going to get a ton of responses because, but again, it's the same stuff over and over and over again, and I think people get a little bit tired of that. They want an insight. They want some perspective. They want some originality, and they want stories. That's the other thing I found is useful as well, is that the more I do things like podcasts and stuff, the more stories I tell, rather than being very sort of, 10 years ago, I would have quoted research and studies and stuff to try and back up my points. Now I just try and tell stories about athletes that I've worked with because people find that the most relatable,
I agree. And I feel that slowly I'm drifting away from, talking about reps and sets and actually getting to know the coach that is there and the story behind is actually, I find a lot more enriching than say, hey, how many sets do you do when you talk about this? So it's nice to hear that other people think the same. William, I want to finish with some rapid fire question with you today. So First one is, what's something that you've recently changed your mind about when it comes to coaching, training, programming, or else?
So I changed my thinking probably about bringing sports skills into the weight room, and it was golf that changed my thinking on that. So whereas before I would have never had any golfer do anything that looks like a golf swing in the gym, and for a lot of golfers that's important because too many of them try and do golf-like stuff in the gym. But with my golfers that have been working with me for a while, now I can be not afraid to start doing more swing specific type training in the gym. But I just feel I always have to caveat that when I say that, because people, they get a bit crazy, but it's like, we can do some swing specific stuff in the gym, very measured and very carefully. But that's what changed. So I'm not afraid. So you'll see videos, sometimes of my guys swinging the golf clubs in the gym.
What are you currently fascinated about?
At the moment, probably design and aesthetics. That's going back to Vizzy Andre. Something he's been talking about is and it's been influencing my approach on social media as well. With my information-based posts, is a very clean design, very simple. Whereas when you scroll through your feed, there's a lot of clutter. And it all becomes just noise. Scroll. Nobody's really paying attention. Well, how can you design something in a fashion that grabs people's attention? It's classic, but also kind of clean looking. And that's kind of what I've been interested in at the moment, is like the design and aesthetic of what it is we're posting. Are you putting the effort into the design and the look of the thing you're putting out? So that's been a kind of an interest of mine at the moment.
What coach should people be following and reading right now?
There's too many, and I don't want to play favorites, but can I name more than one? Is that okay?
Come on, go for it.
So I think Keir Wenham-Flatt, rugby strength coach, who you've obviously, I think you've had on. He's influenced me an awful lot, not just from a coaching standpoint, but from business as well. He's helped me an awful lot with that. Another one is Sam Portland, who's carved out a niche as a speed expert, and has been doing some very interesting stuff there. Another coach that I've worked with quite closely is Terence Kennel, who I wrote Big Hitters Manual with him, but he always he's a lot younger than me, but I'm always learning things from him, particularly when it comes to integrating strength and conditioning and rehabilitation. So these guys sort of get on with very well. And then another one who I recently reached out to is Alan Bishop, who I guess most people would call a very old school strength and conditioning coach, because he still applies a lot of Poliquin methods and a lot of what people would call old school classic strength and conditioning. But he seems to integrate it very, very well with the basketball team he's with at Houston. So I'm very interested at how he manages to do that. And then on the other end of the spectrum is Stephen Jones, who would be completely the opposite end of the spectrum to Alan Bishop, where Stephen Jones takes a very sport-specific approach very SSP-based approach, and seems to get really, really good results with his cricket guys. So, you know, and it's very interesting how you can have two different coaches with such different approaches, but still have, you know, positive performance outcomes.
Yeah, for those who saw me laughing when you mentioned Terence, I'm only laughing because I'm actually interviewing him in 20 minutes. So you'll be number 107 and he'll be number 108. So that's
brilliant.
Yeah. Close. A book to read.
Oh yeah, I think I can pull one up. Is it next to me? It would be Mladen's book, Mladen Jovanovic's book. This one.
Yeah.
Strength training manual. It's probably my favorite strength conditioning book ever because he's the only guy who can blend, you know, sets and reps and schemes with Jordan Peterson. You know, I don't know how he managed to do that, but he manages to you know, yeah. So he's done a great job of merging sort of, you know, high level philosophy and thinking about systems with sets and reps and programming schemes and periodization models. He manages to merge those two things beautifully. So it's my favorite strength and conditioning book. You know, even though it only came out the other year, it's easily my favorite.
Yeah. So I definitely need to get my hand on this one. And lastly, a podcast to listen to. Not this one. You can't say this one.
I actually don't listen to that many strength and conditioning podcasts, which is an admission of mine, unfortunately. But there's a podcast. I obviously listen to Joe Rogan, who doesn't. But in terms of my favorite podcast, it'd probably be Jordan Peterson's podcast, I'd say. You know, I really enjoy that podcast, and it's brought me consistent value for a number of years now. And I'd say go check that out. And some of his interviews with recently he interviewed Matthew McConaughey, and that was really interesting. I learned something about that guy I never thought I would have known. And I really value Jordan Peterson's podcast. It's probably my favorite to listen to.
Yeah, I'll second that. Absolutely recommend all of Jordan's work, whether it's his book or podcasts or other things he puts out. So guys, go check that out. Where can people find you on social, William? So
if you want to find me on Instagram, that's probably where I'm probably most active. It's at Powering Through, all one word. On Twitter, I'm at WS Wayland. And I don't really use Facebook that much anymore, I'll be honest. And if you want to email me personally, William@powering-through.com.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today, man.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who tuned into this episode. Make sure you follow William on Instagram, link in the description. Also want to finish by saying thank you to our sponsor for this episode. You can go to strengthcoachnetwork.com/upside to get 50% off your first month. We'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.